It is 1:00. It's Wednesday. Welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. This is Edgar Zazueta to my right, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. Welcome to the show today. A packed show for you today. Go ahead and jump on our chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from, what's happening in your region or your district. Ellen Wheeler, the very first person, Edgar, that gets onto the chat today. How are you, man?
Get right to it, right? Who's going to be
first? It's been a very busy week, Edgar, since we were on the show last Wednesday. I don't think that you and I had an expectation of how busy it was going to be. If there's an indication of how busy it's been, Edgar and I were still communicating back and forth on Friday, well after the workday was done. And then he was on my phone on Sunday following a very busy weekend of work. And then we start ledge hearings this week, Edgar. I have to imagine this is really that time when all of you in governmental relations get really excited about the type of work that's going on.
Yeah, I think with almost with everything else, time has lost kind of its concept, right? I forget what time of the year this is. It's crazy that coming up on a year of doing this. And, you know, I think it only reflects the challenges that our folks are having, right? I mean, we continue to say this. When things are heating up here, it's because this is playing out locally. And I think this week was a huge example of that. Yeah, so there was a few things going on, Naj, and I figured I wouldn't dog it this week and join you from the beginning of the show instead of trying to come in there in the last 5 minutes. But yeah, a lot to report.
I appreciate it. I was completely out of steam by the time you came on last week. I want to say hello to John Bohannon, Don Austin, the superintendent over in Palo Alto Unified, our good friend, loyal viewer Scott Smith over at ABC Unified, Christine and Alan. So good to have you. Of course, jump on the chat. Let us know what's going on in your region. I do want to bring you up to date at the moment. And Edgar, I'll have you just really quickly address this. At this hour, State Board of Ed is talking about assessments. Now, we've had a number of you over the past couple of weeks bring up the question in the chat about assessments. That's currently being discussed right now. We'll talk also with our guest executive director, Wes Smith, about assessments. But Edgar, the discussion that's happening right now, I know you are monitoring that. Anything that you can tell us about what we're hearing so far?
Yeah, in typical form for lunch break, you know, things are happening literally as we speak. So our team is working this. So I'm going to be, you know, trying to play real reporter here and checking my phone on see if there's any news that breaks in the next 30 minutes or so. But just kind of bring folks up to speed on this. The state board, like Naj said, is trying to figure out what the next steps are going to be on testing. The federal government a couple of days ago came out and said that they're not going to support blanket waivers. So in other words, they do want schools to administer state assessments, which I know is not the news we were hoping for. Nonetheless, we've had a huge turnout of our folks, of administrators, folks in the field, pushing the state board all morning. They say, yeah, we hear what the feds are saying, but what can we do with this? So they're struggling with this question. There's talk about a blanket waiver. Should they still push the feds on this front? The CDE is talking about other alternatives that we might be able to deal with. So literally, as we speak, they're trying to sort out what are the next steps on this issue. So we'll try to talk a little bit more as this develops here in the next few minutes.
Yeah, and if we do have more breaking news that comes in, we will have a member of Edgar's staff jump in with breaking news that comes in. Want to say hello to Angela, John Eberly, Holly Eads is out there. Our great president, Ron Williams, out there as well. Don Austin had some great tweets this week. And we mentioned him earlier about schools reopening there. And then Gary Reller just jumped in to tell us, he says, we are opening schools, elementary returning March 9th. That's over in Riverside Unified, secondary following quickly after. Let me just acknowledge a couple of things. Congratulations to our educators in our schools, Humboldt, Marin County, San Mateo, Shasta, and Yolo County. All of those counties have moved from the purple tier in the blueprint over to the red tier. So that means some good news for the students over in those counties. Also want to bring up 3 documents, and Gianna Miller, our great social media star, is going to go ahead and pop those into the chat. The first one, this comes from California Department of Public Health, the updated consolidated school guidance. We'll have that jumped into the chat, as well as the latest information on youth sports. Edgar, you and I were paying attention to a lot about youth sports last week. That is out there. Also, a letter that we're going to be referencing in just a moment, the Ed Coalition letter on Senate Bill 86, Assembly Bill 86, that response letter on our resource hub right now. We'll go ahead and dump that in, but that is also at content.acsa.org. Also, as we've talked, Edgar, about more districts opening up, I'll tell you that last night's board meeting here in Elk Grove Unified, they approved some proposed starting dates for the elementary schools to open. What I thought was interesting, and you'll see this in a lot of the large urban, large suburban districts, is because there are so many different types of schedules, some on year-round, some on tracks, that dates can be fluid with how some of these schools open. And that's certainly the case here in Elk Grove Unified. But good news, right? This is the type of thing that we can celebrate, is that we are starting to get these proposed dates for opening.
Yeah, and this is very much our issue here, that we're trying to push the state, and we'll get into this to say the least in terms of the SB 86 and the efforts. But one of the main messages we're telling the state now is that, look, the health situation is improving. A lot of schools, a lot of districts are moving to in-person instruction. And the last thing we need for them to do is come and muck it up, for lack of a better word. Don't mess it up, do no harm, right? And I think that is one of the pieces we keep pointing to now. Districts around the state are able to get across that finish line and get kids back into the classrooms. And we're really sensitive for the state. We appreciate the effort, but unfortunately to date, the efforts that they've shown us, we frankly think are going to complicate things more than help them.
Yeah. So that brings us to our guest. Let's bring him in. We are honored to have ACSA Executive Director Wes Smith with us today to go over what has been a very eventful week here in the state of California with public education. Wes, so good to have you with us. I want to set this up as far as a timeline. Details of the ledge proposal, this Senate Bill 86, Assembly Bill 86, were made public on Thursday. By Friday morning, you were gathering with nearly 500 superintendents in the state from districts large and small, almost half of the superintendents from the state, to talk about the tenets of this proposed legislation. Can you give us the inside on the district reaction from these leaders to this proposed legislation?
Yeah, happy to do so, Naj, and thanks for the invite. I had a chance to be on Fallon today, but I checked and your viewership is much better, so I bailed on Jimmy and decided to hang out with you and Edgar. And I just want to clarify, too, as we talk about this timeline, certainly we dropped letters at certain points and had meetings on certain days, but we've been giving this message to state policymakers for months now. Right? This isn't new. We've been telling them this is what needs to happen. We'll get into how much they're listening in just a second. But I have to give a big shout out to our superintendents and district leaders. We had a meeting on Thursday with about 150 of them. And it's almost like the legislature knew that we were going to have our Thursday meeting, so they didn't want to have their proposal be published yet. But after our meeting, they did. And so we had an emergency meeting Friday. And like you said, almost 500 district leaders on a call with very short notice. And to your question, they are where they have been. That there are things that are being proposed by policymakers in the state that will impede school reopening and will force school closures that don't, in fact, grandfather people in. Testing, vaccinations, expanding collective bargaining, timelines that can't be met. Things that we've talked about ad nauseum. But our superintendents, and it was a large number, were really unanimous in support of the advocacy that happened over the weekend and stalled that vote this Monday.
Yeah, let's talk about what's happened over the weekend. Edgar, you were working with district leaders, with administrators, with the Education Coalition on that letter that we talked about that's available at content.acsa.org. That was sent to the legislature on Sunday night. What's the strategy behind that letter, and what are we trying to accomplish as we make our way into talking about that Monday legislative session?
Yeah, it's interesting given the times that we're in. If this was a year or so ago, obviously we wouldn't be talking about reopening or going back to in-person instruction. But if this was another issue, we would have walked the halls, if you will. We would have sent folks to the Capitol, knocking on people's doors, trying to get to legislators. Obviously, we can't do that given the current health situation. So we had to get a little innovative, right? And I think to Wes's point, calling on our members, even on a Sunday, even on a weekend, to start making those calls, sending those emails, and they were heard. And then we kind of wanted to show a show of force, if you will, and how we tried to do that in the letter on very short notice. I mean, I've heard from a lot of our leaders that actually wanted to jump onto this letter, and there might still be opportunities if this moves. I think we literally gave folks hours. Whoever happened to see our email, jump on in, and we did what we here in the business we call a NASCAR letter, right? A NASCAR logo letter, where just everybody that wants to jump on, obviously with the statewide associations taking the lead, really trying to do the show of force to tell the legislature, hey, while you're busy congratulating yourselves that this bill is going to reopen schools, and we'll get into some of the quotes that we're not going to give districts an option not to reopen, the stated intent was not being met by this bill. Far from it. If anything, we were very concerned that this was going to be a step backwards, especially for those that are already open. So we pulled this group that we've been working with together and got a lot of support from around the state. And I don't know if a piece of correspondence has got as much attention, at least coming from us, on the floor of the assembly as this little letter did this last Monday. But I think they got the message. So nothing else we can accomplish on that end.
We talk about advocacy mattering so much, and I don't know if there's been any education organization that's been more impactful from the advocacy standpoint than ACSA over these 2 months, when you talk about Governor Newsom talking during our soup symposium, and then everything that we've been doing impacting over at the Capitol. Wes, let's get to this hearing over at the state Capitol on Monday. There's an expectation that there's going to be a vote from the legislature on SB and AB 86. One of the authors of this legislation, Assemblymember Phil Ting, who's been on our show, he had this to say about that letter.
I have to say that I was very disappointed by a late night letter that I received from many of our school superintendents and our school boards associations that, again, asked us to, quote unquote, do no harm. I thought the letter was tone deaf. It showed a complete lack of understanding of where parents and students are.
All right, Phil Ting, guest on this show, clearly wasn't happy with the letter that came on. Can't guarantee that he'll come on the show again. Wes, your reaction to his comments?
Yeah, let's talk about being disappointed, right? I'm disappointed when policymakers are not honest with our students, their caregivers in our communities, to suggest that they got that letter at the 11th hour misrepresents the communications we've made. I'm disappointed that we continue to use these red herring arguments. We agree that the best thing for our students and our adults is to get back to in-person instruction as soon as it's safe to do so. And we believe that can even be done and is being done in the purple. So no one's arguing that point. And then this suggestion that we're tone deaf is just, it's priceless. Because in fact, we know what communities are saying. We know that they want to get back as soon as it's safe to do so, not just the classroom, but the athletic fields, the theaters, etc. What's true, though, is that policymakers aren't listening to what the experts are telling them. We've shared with them ad nauseum that if your interest is to transition to in-person instruction, that testing cadence that they're requiring won't work. It's untenable. You can't afford it. Even if you could figure out how to get all the tests and get parents to allow their students to get tested. Requiring vaccinations as a condition for reopening. It won't work. We don't have the capacity around the state. Moreover, we've demonstrated that in the purple, hundreds of school districts with over 100,000 students have opened in the purple without vaccinations. Now, they should be a priority, right? They should be a priority. But they should be a priority if they're educators who are willing to come back and do in-person instruction, because we look awfully bad when we take vaccines out of the arms of the elderly and then refuse to come to work. And then collective bargaining, we've shared that, hey, let's be honest. The big reason why so many districts are not back to in-person right now is because of the impasse at the bargaining table. So we can either focus on spending time in the classroom or at the bargaining table. And we've shared this with them, but they're not listening. We get it. We're listening, and we're trying to inform the process. So when they said tone deaf, priceless.
Yeah, and we're getting that kind of reaction right now on the chat. Christine Fasella says unfair assessment. Gary Reller called it out of touch. Don Austin said no monopoly on disappointment. John Eberly, let them walk a day in our shoes. Clueless. I do want to bring one other soundbite in from Phil Ting, and he's addressing local control. Here's another piece of his comments from that Monday hearing.
Districts took the $5 billion and only used 11% of the money for in-person learning. And again, they want us to do the same thing. They want us to give them money with no accountability, no guarantees of in-person learning this year. I am normally a huge proponent of local control, but this year, local control has been a complete failure. We have seen the whole trust us motto from the districts fail.
All right, Wes, that's part two. I already saw Edgar giving me a little bit of a head shake right there.
trying to control myself.
He's trying to control himself. We'll get his reaction to that in a second. But Wes, Phil Ting had lots to say about us in public education for his bill that he's co-authored. Your reaction to that on local control?
Yeah, once again, it's just untrue. It misrepresents the reality in the field. If 85% of our district costs are in people and people won't agree to come back to work, how do you spend that money other than to just give them bonuses for something else, right? So it's not about local control. What we're saying is don't tie this funding to metrics that will impede reopening and force closures, which this absolutely will do. And let's not forget too that these are Prop 98 dollars that they're talking about. It's not their money, right? This is your money, districts. This is your money to support your students. We can't forget that. And of course, we want accountability. We've demonstrated that across the state we can get this done, right? And we've done it all over the state. But what we've also seen is when folks won't agree, you can't spend the money on in-person, right? And so let's address that once again. Let's talk about being tone deaf. The elephant in the room is identified. Now let's address it, right? Let's protect jobs as we've done, right? Let's pay folks, but let's show up, right? When it's safe to do so, let's show up and let's benefit those students who right now are aching to be back to some sense of normalcy.
Yeah, and Debbie Rose says it right here. Blame will not solve this issue. And then Tom O'Malley says that money allowed Modoc Joint to open as scheduled, keep all schools open for every student every day to date. So I mean, there's proof right there. Edgar, let me ask you, what happens now? What are the next steps here? What's going on in the state capitol and what you're hearing?
Yeah. I'll take a second just to add on to what Wes said, and he's super on the mark there, obviously, in terms of, and like Gary said, the legislator sometimes, with all due respect, might need a lesson on what Prop 98 is and how it works, because they're not actually giving us anything new. These are, as Wes said, these are dollars that would have gone to your schools anyway. So this notion of taking the dollars and then telling you how to spend it and putting all these conditions on it, that's another question. And as you noted, Naj, we had Assemblyman Ting on the show here. He actually at the time had a bill, AB 10, that was aimed at addressing in those situations where communities can't come to an agreement that if the state hits a particular health metric, that they had to open. What happened? They walked away from their own bill. They actually went away from something. If that was the bill, we may have supported that, right? Knowing that folks figured it out, and in the places that haven't figured it out, and knowing that those kids are suffering because the adults haven't been able to come to an agreement. Yeah, but the legislature walked away from their own measure. I won't get into the politics of why that happened. You guys could connect the dots there, right? All right, off my soapbox. What comes next? From all indications, things are a bit of at a standstill right now. The governor has indicated that what the legislature put forth was not what he wanted to see, that the bill didn't do enough. I think, not to give ourselves too much credit, but I think it's been clear that the governor has kind of taken a different approach. And really the change in his narrative started with the superintendent's symposium remarks. And he's been trying to hold strong on some of these issues. And they've even done a mea culpa, in terms of knowing that maybe some of the things that they introduced early on, maybe that's not the route to go, right? And how do we go back and really make sure that we're doubling down on this energy that we're seeing around the state in districts already starting to transition to in-person instruction. So it's a little unclear. Initially, the assembly was going to vote on this on Monday. I think it got stalled as part of some of this pushback, the efforts. Not clear if they're going to try to move it. The Senate has agendized a hearing, but we've heard that they have no intent on actually taking up the bill unless there's a deal. The governor's striking a little bit of a more positive tone in terms of his optimism to getting an agreement. They're not there yet, so it's not clear how quick or how imminent there will be any action. Again, don't necessarily know that that's bad news for us, because as the letter said, kind of our main component right now is, our main objective is that the state doesn't mess this up, right? That they don't do something that impacts all of you that have already got kids back into the classroom or right at the brink of that.
A reminder for our viewers, jump in the chat. The chat has been really active. You guys are fired up today. Go ahead and jump in our chat. If you have any questions for Wes and Edgar, go ahead and drop those in. Wes, I want to shift topics really quickly, because at the top of the show, we talked about how State Board is currently talking about assessments. And we know that the Biden administration is enforcing the annual standardized test this spring. What are the peaks and pitfalls that you're hearing from administrators, from education leaders, with response to assessments right now?
Yeah, great topic. Before I transition to that, I want to make sure that everyone heard what Edgar just said. No deal is better than a bad deal, right? And so that's what we've been fighting for. If you're not going to help us, get out of our way, because folks are figuring it out, right? As Ruth Perez and others have been sharing, our members are figuring it out. As we talk about testing, though, important topic. Our ACSA members are first and foremost student advocates, equity warriors. They are out there working daily to make sure that those access and opportunity gaps are eliminated. And so we need data for that purpose. And so ACSA's position has been very clear that testing and testing data should only be used for instructional purposes, not for naming and blaming and shaming. And why? Well, you heard the state board mention it several meetings ago, that it would be professional malpractice to bring students back and then do this standardized test, that the stress level on students is unconscionable. Moreover, the data that we're going to get is neither valid nor reliable. So why are we playing this game if it's not meaningful data, if it's going to stress our students? We have to push back and say, no, not on our watch. We're going to use the data to make sure that our students are benefiting. that they don't fall further behind, right? That our most vulnerable populations get the additional support they deserve. That's what the data is for. But again, we don't have the federal government lining up with us, but that's okay. Hey, that's the mood right now. Let's just fight, right? I mean, we're firing folks up on a Sunday night. Let's keep firing folks up because this is what is in the best interest of our students. I'll tell you a funny side note. My daughter's in school at UC Davis Medical School, and it's been online this whole year. They used to have online tests. They changed that midway through the year because they had a record number of A's on these tests. So the university realized, no, we got to have people show up for this. If we really want this to demonstrate what they know and are able to do, they got to show up. Well, that's not an option for us right now in public education. So this testing isn't good. It's not good for our students. If we're going to use it for those purposes, let's use it for good, right? To help.
Well, and Marie puts here in the comments, concerned about how these assessments will further contribute to the equity gap for subgroups, which is, Wes, that's exactly, an important topic, something you were addressing, equity issue. And so, Edgar, I would ask you, we've been very impactful with advocacy over the last few months. What can our members do to advance the discussion on assessments and equity?
Yeah. So on that note, and this is actually happening as we speak, as we noted, we had a number of members call into the state board, send letters, make the case that many folks in the comments are making, and as a result, some of this is happening. So let me give a quick snapshot of just things that are happening here. Just a couple of minutes ago, the SBE, the state board, did vote unanimously to submit a waiver to the federal government to decouple the federal accountability with assessments. So to Wes's point, okay, if you're gonna force testing, then at minimum, you obviously shouldn't be using this for accountability purposes. Also, you have to look at the pieces about participation rate. And the federal government had already said that they would be willing to waive the 95% participation rate on general testing. They've also taken a second motion, and this is going to cause some heartache for our folks, to extend the testing window into July, right? That means that devil's in the details there, right? Depending where your district, where your LEA is on this in-person instruction continuum, that could mean very different things, but they're trying to put some more flexibility. I think the piece that our folks are still going to want to push for, and it looks like they're still going through some of these motions as we speak, that they are going to submit a general waiver ask to the federal government as it relates to the science test. And I think they're debating how far to make that ask in terms of, we hear you, federal government, you want us to test, but you need to look at the practical reality. So to your question, Naj, I think there's going to be a state front. I think this is going to shift to the federal government. And I think that it'll be worthy of our educators around the country continuing to make this case with the Biden administration.
Hey, Wes, you were leading our governance meetings last week, and you didn't hesitate to talk about the great work of ACSA members over these last few months, especially with advocacy and just telling the story and having the voice. What's bringing you hope as we come up on the bottom of the hour here? What's bringing you hope from the conversations that you're having with administrators, from what you're seeing with schools begin to reopen, and just the overall advocacy efforts of ACSA members to be out there, to be in front, to telling the story about what's happening?
Yeah, courage for and on behalf of our students. And it's not just this school year. It goes back to last spring when the state didn't know what to do with the pandemic. And so our leaders, absent any kind of state support, had to close schools and figure out how to provide educational opportunities. So the courage started from the beginning of this, and it continues. Our folks keep fighting for these opportunities. They keep doing everything they can to navigate these polarizing politics so that their students can benefit. And so their courage, their continued support of their students, and their tireless efforts to do the right thing, that gives me hope.
ACSA Executive Director Wes Smith. Wes, thanks so much for being with us. We're honored to have you on the show. I hope that Jimmy Fallon's people will be okay that you came on here instead of there. Thanks, Wes.
My
very
pleasure,
much.
man. My
All
pleasure.
right.
Great job to both of you.
Thanks, Wes.
All right, folks, we have hit the bottom of the hour here. Edgar, it's not often that you get to deliver breaking news to us. So usually we've got Kevin Gordon has done it. I think John Fensterwall has done it. I mean, clearly we've been able to deliver breaking news before, but that's important information that's come out.
Still very much evolving. Big shout out to Diana Vu on our team, who's working the state board front as we speak, sending us messages. And just know that we've been pushing really hard on some of the issues that you've been talking about, the local assessments piece. And we have a number of champions there on the state board that have been echoing the sentiments from your folks. They feel like they're a little bit in a box here, given the federal rules. So I'll be interested to see what this total package looks like. But it's not too late on this front. I think we're going to have some more work to do on this assessments piece, whether it be with the state or to the federal government. So stay tuned on that end.
Folks, thank you so much for being with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We promise that Edgar will sit here with me for the entire show next week as well, because he doesn't have a choice. I'm assuming Edgar will have plenty more to talk about with school reopenings, with assessments. We'll have more information on assessments coming up. Folks, thank you so much for being with us today. We'll see you next Wednesday here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break.